there was a old woman who was forgetting herself because she had dementia, I think, or maybe Alzheimer's. I'm not super sure. In any case, she's in the nursing home and she's not able to really communicate with people. She's forgotten the identities of her children. She's pretty much lost almost all of the things that make her herself. But she knew how to play the piano. And if somebody set her down at the piano, she would play music. And she would talk about music. If you told her to play a specific song, she would know it. She could play it. Because that spoke to her and it was engraved on the surface of her soul in a way that no words could be. And for me, over the last couple years, I've been collecting different things that I think are important to me. Video game collectibles, memorabilia, figurines of different sorts. And those things feel like they're important to me. In a way, they're not. They're not important because they're just decorations. But they are important because things that speak to our soul on some level, things that remind us of something greater than ourselves, things that make us feel inspired or happy or connected in some way, those things matter. Because there's times when you're flying blind in life. There's times when you don't have words to represent the content of your heart. And in those times when words fail us, in those times when we maybe feel nothing, it's extremely important for us to remember those images of something that reminds us that we are greater than just the mere sum of our parts. You can go study a textbook that'll tell you any number of factual things about how the world works. But what really matters is feeling a true sense of connection. Feeling like you know on a spiritual level why it all matters. And literature, art, creative work, those things help us to understand the things that there are no words to represent. Essentially, literature is another form of language, something that gives us a connection to things which are spiritual. Back in the Middle Ages, people would look up at the stained glass windows of grand cathedrals and little churches, and they would see pictures that represented the Bible stories and the church teachings, which they couldn't really understand very well because literacy was not really a thing at that time. So people who couldn't read or write would still be able to look at the light filtering through the windows of a church, and they'd be able to see picture stories that represented ideas important to their faith. I think for us in the modern times, movies and games and all of those sorts of media that we feel are interesting to us kind of fill that place. We have the opportunity to create a picture of things that we don't really understand. And maybe we do that in the form of a game or a movie or a story. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just important that we find those things which speak to us and then continue to keep them around, because they are like instruments that we look at when we're flying an airplane through the clouds. They're things that keep us grounded when we might otherwise feel lost. And the truth is, we all sometimes feel lost. We all sometimes have a sense that we're part of something greater than ourselves, but we don't necessarily feel connected. And stories, imagination, fantasy, those things all help us to understand. Maybe it's kind of like Santa Claus to a child. The child may not understand advanced philosophy, but they understand that kind, jolly, red-suited man rewarding being good. And perhaps there will be times in their life when they understand more fully the philosophy behind all of that. But when they're a small child, it's sufficient just to say, be good, and you'll get a present. And they understand what that means. I think it's very important to surround yourself with symbols that feel meaningful to you. Because if you don't have those things, you can sort of lose yourself along the way. Because we really do relate to the world through abstracts. We relate to the world through things which help us to understand that which would otherwise be inconceivable. Art, imagination, fantasy, literature, games, all of those things are essentially a form of language. There's something that helps us to be connected to things beyond our understanding. I'm reminded of a story in the Bible about, I believe, Abraham, and he was up on the mountain, and God passed by. And as the story goes, he was allowed to see the reflection of the light of God, but he wasn't allowed to look directly at God as he passed, because it was said that no mortal person could look directly at the face of God and live. And so only indirectly could he look at the face of God? And I think that's how it is with us as human beings trying to find our place in the world, trying to have a sense of being connected, trying to have a sense of meaning. We feel connection to all these interesting things that we find. Stories and characters and tidbits of history. And in a way, those are kind of a reflection of the face of God, aren't they? All those old deities and gods and goddesses and tales of mythology and legend and heroism. They give us a living picture of principles which might otherwise be forever and abstract. And maybe they aren't as important as more serious things, but I would say that without imagination, without fantasy, without the things that help us feel connected and inspired and grounded and moved, we wouldn't really have all of that much reason to see good in the world and to believe in ourselves. There's a lot of people who like to focus on technical things. They like to focus on mechanics. They like to focus on all of the nuts and bolts that make the world tick. There's all those serious people in the world. And yet it always seems like they're missing out on something important. Because all the mastery in the world doesn't really mean very much if you don't have any imagination. It's like playing Anno 1800, the city building game set in the 18th century. I like to play that game casually, and when I build a city, I just let it grow out organically however I see fit. I don't worry about being extremely efficient. But you can go find build orders online where people math it out and they basically plug it into a spreadsheet and figure out what the absolute most productive and efficient way to play the game is. But in the process of that, they wind up making the game about as fun as managing an Excel spreadsheet. Because the point of the game isn't to be purely efficient, necessarily. It's also to enjoy the experience of immersing yourself in the game world. Imagination is important. And I think there's a lot of serious people who frown on imagination and think we should shut it down and devote our lives to serious things, put away the childish things. But I disagree with that. Because I think if you put away all of the childish things, you stifle your imagination and you always try to be serious, you don't allow yourself to be afforded any of the silly things or any of the things that aren't serious, I think after a while you wind up a bit corrupted. You wind up without any real understanding of why you're doing any of the things you're doing. You're going through the motions. You're managing through things. You're doing things that might appear to be useful, but you don't have any joy or wonder or faith left anymore. And that's not a good place to be. So I think it's important. Find things that you think are inspiring. Find things that you feel moved by. Find things that make you smile inside. And then keep them close. Because there will be times in your life when you've got to fly blind. Times when you don't feel anything. Times when you feel lost. And in those times, it certainly is nice to be able to look around you and have some frivolous things that help you remember who you are in the moments when you're tempted to forget. As always, good luck in your adventure wherever you find yourself. Till next time, thanks for watching.